Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the season premiere of Lucifer. A great season premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, Lucifer's on his way. Obviously, it's his last night in LA, and he's up running into a cop that he's helped up in the past, and he's like, wait, you're that guy? He's like, oh yeah, you're the guy that likes to go fast, spend his time on the bike. He's like, oh yeah, I didn't think you remember me. I thought it was so interesting that Lucifer's explaining everything. He's like, oh, so does that make you God now? He's like, yeah, well, soon to be. It's like, this guy's taking it with stride, which no one ever does with Lucifer. So I guess it's because he wanted something at the end. He's like, oh yeah, let me play into your delusions. I don't give a crap what it is, but yeah, I'm gonna help you out. Part of me was wondering, like, if things shifted for Lucifer now that he became God. It doesn't seem like it has, but in the sense of, like, I was wondering, like, his whole thing has been about reflecting people's desires back in him. But I was like, now that maybe it hasn't happened yet because he hasn't officially taken the throne because he keeps postponing it. But I was wondering, like, moment he becomes God, will that shift what his thing is? Like, will it no longer be throwing people's desires back at him? Which I'm like, it makes you wonder as God, like, how would that work? Like, as God, you're supposed to, like, watch over everyone, like, throwing their desires back at, like, their prayers. Like, it almost feels like it could go hand in hand to a certain extent. But, like, just giving into your desires entirely isn't a good thing. And we see that with the cop, because he's like, yeah, because of that, I got, with that money you gave me, I got a sweet foxtail for my antenna. Yeah, and a whole bunch of cocaine. But then, like, I kind of got stuck. I will never advance in my career. I'm going to pretty much be riding his bike forever. My wife left me. She took it home and everything. He's like, oh, but I got a boat. There's a lot of parties. I'm like, oh, cool, because I think that's so interesting, because we've never touched on that, like, the dark side of Lucifer's, like, giving people their desires of life. I was like, it's so freeing and stuff like that, but it is the thing of, if you don't balance it out, if you just go 0 to 100 with your desires without the consciousness of, like, the rest of you balancing it out, like, you're just giving into your desires, succumbing to them, it can be a bad thing. And it seems like this guy's life got turned upside down. And we've never, to my knowledge, I don't think we've ever touched on, like, the flip side of light. So it makes you want to go, should we check up on everyone Lucifer's ever asked? Or what is it you truly desire? Maybe some of them, their desires didn't go, like, all in about it. So there's not as many issues potentially. Maybe it's just this one guy, but it does present an interesting thing. And the fact that they're throwing this theme out there now makes you wonder if that's going to be a big part of the season or not. So, but Lucifer is taking Chloe to, like, a magician's club, which I love that he's all about it, because he likes it because it's like lying without actually really lying. Like, the art of deception is so interesting to him, but it also because he's all, I was like, oh, I love about the wonderment. He's like, I don't want to know how I don't want to know the magic behind it. I don't want to understand, which I'm like that too about certain things. I'm like, oh, there's some, like, magic stuff. Like, I've never actually seen, like, magic show in real life, but I would never want to know how it works. Same thing for movie magic. It's like, oh, cool. I don't want to know how the bread is made, how the butter is made, rather. Like, I never want to know. It's like, you don't have to tell me. Like, I've learned certain things just because I've listened to enough, like, podcasts about entertainment industry, so I know some of, like, the more production side of things and just how, like, what roles certain, like, producers and stuff like that. I get what a lot of that is now. If you asked me that years ago, I would have been like, I don't know. But now I'm a little more insightful. Do I know everything? No, and I'm fine with that. I don't want to know how the cake is made. That's a better metaphor. Like, I don't want to know the ins and outs of, like, what goes into making a TV show and a movie, and just, like, you know, it ruins a little bit of the magic. And I love that Lucifer's all about the wonderment magic, which is almost like, you know, the kid at heart that he is. But Chloe's a detective. She's all about seeking the truth. So it is so interesting that this case kind of butts them against each other in the regard of, like, oh, she wants to figure out all the things, and Lucifer's like, don't ruin it. I want to keep the wonderment. But then, like, you know, but, like, how he's geeking out about the magic and stuff like that, so interesting. But yeah, like, obviously some of the stuff here, he has correlation between it, because it's like, oh yeah, there was a battle between so-and-so at this very bar in, like, 70 something. She's like, who won? And he's like, well, me, of course. But a murder takes place, and at first it's like, oh, Mogar, like, this was supposed to be his last name, but it actually was his protege, Jarrett, who actually ended up dead. And I love that, like, Chloe's asking all these questions, and then Mogar's, like, explaining, and Lucifer's like, la 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 la, I don't want to hear this, shut up. And it's like, oh, he doesn't want him. It's like, he's like, yeah, but I'm sure there's more to the trick. And Mogar's like, no, it's not. I basically literally explained everything. And it's like, you just see Lucifer's so defeated, like, oh. And so obviously Ella's super pumped coming in. Yeah, we're reunited because Chloe apparently has quit. I mean, it makes sense because that was a conversation last season. Well, back half of the season 5 was like, well, when you do become God, like, what am I going to do? Like, I'm going to be a detective and go to heaven. Like, obviously the conversation has been like, right, well, I'll spend time in heaven, then I'll, come back to Earth. Because I was about to say, like, that is going to be a balancing act between, like, living a normal life while also, like, living a celestial life as a human. Because it's like, right. Because also, like, the time frame is probably going to be a little weird. Because, like, time works differently in hell. Like, there's never been conversations about time working differently in heaven. So is it like a one-to-one from heaven? Maybe because the way hell is structured, what it's supposed to represent, it makes sense for so much time. Because it's supposed to feed into the torture. But, like, does heaven and Earth kind of work on the same thing, or is like heaven more like the hyperbolic time chamber, where it's like, oh, an hour? Well, to be fair, hell's more like the hyperbolic time chamber, really. But so I'm curious. But like I said, it's like heaven, like more of a one-to-one to Earth or not? Because we could get in like Doctor Who shenanigans, and that like it's a thing where like the Doctor always tries to get like her, like their companion, back to like their time at a certain point in time. It's like, oh, like, see, we're back the minute you left. It's only like you've been gone a minute. Oh wow, it's actually been 3 months. It's not an exact science. I'm wondering if it's going to be something like that where Chloe goes away with Lucifer and comes back. It's like, wait, it's been 3 months already? What? No, I thought it was supposed to. Oh, I guess time works. Is that they haven't brought that up, so maybe there's not really. Like I said, maybe it's just purely a 1-for-1. But my initial thought was like Chloe even admits it, like she's not willing to give up that detective side of things because she likes it. It's something she's really, really good at. But you have Ella and Carol, which I guess they never started dating. Like they're working now that Chloe's kind of backed away, like retired. Well, to be fair, she retired at the end of last season anyway, and I guess she just never like reinstated herself in that regard. Was that back in the beginning of season? I'm blurring all that together. But regardless, yeah, I guess I'm pretty sure that was like at the beginning I think that was like the first half of season 5, maybe. Regardless, like I said, that's all kind of blurring a little together. Like, it doesn't, like, especially because like the recap at the beginning, it was pretty nice of them to like do both halves of the season, not just like the second half. God, what was I thinking? But like, my whole point is Carol and Ella, I thought they'd be actually dating, but they're like not, because I guess for her it'd be a little unprofessional in certain regards, even though like Dan set that up. But it's like, oh, we're just kind of working together. And Ella later on, she's like, I'm not into Carol at all. It's like, no, that's not the question I was going to ask. And she's like, oh, okay. But you have Chloe doing everything she can to like, oh yeah, no, we gotta help out. Like Lucifer's like, oh, we could just get out of here, right? Okay, cool. But like Chloe's like, no, they must have to keep us here because we're witnesses and everything. So keeps making excuses so that they can stay and she can investigate and eavesdrop on the investigation, which is pretty interesting. And Carol was handling it with stride because initially he's kind of like got Lucifer as one of his suspects. It's like, where were you before this? It's like, oh yeah, I was bribing a motorcycle car. You were bribing an officer. It's like, yeah, it wouldn't be the first time. If you need to ask about it, he'll tell you. It's like, yeah, I'm actually pretty good with a sword. I fought a Yakuza boss. He's like, I also did so-and-so, and it's like, yeah, but that was like a demon blade, and this was like a regular blade, so it's not a 1-for-1. And it's like, Lucifer, what were you doing in there? And he's like, I told him the truth. It's like, yeah, I love that about you, but now you're like at the top of his suspect list. But Lucifer does, like, the cop does confirm what Lucifer was saying. It's like, yeah, so he confirmed your alibi, plus that cop got fired. It's like, oh, the poor guy. I'm sure he's going to pop up this season or something like that. Maybe he'll pop up later on, just like, oh, things aren't going his way because of Lucifer to a certain extent. So we'll see. But what was a really interesting conversation is between Lucifer and Ella, where Ella's like, she's a little hesitant about the guy. He's like, no. She's like, oh yeah, my issues with the big guy. He's like, nah, that was so 2 years ago. Now it feels like anytime I pray, he's not there. And it's like, oh, that's crazy. That's Dodo like brain, right? So he's like, yeah. And it's like, and that was a really interesting conversation where it's like, yeah, like, I mean, God can't be everywhere. But she's like, yeah, he is. That's his thing. Like, he cares and loves about all of us. It's, yeah, but it's like, what about, his loved ones? It's like, no, that's why. Like, he loves all of us. So, like, he would never pick someone. It's like, no, we're all the people he cares about and loves. Like, he's got a watchful eye over it. That's kind of his job. I know you're gonna love Lucifer. Like, oh, he did kind of like start liking NCIS and stuff like that. But it's like, it's a different perspective Lucifer had, where it's like, and he ends up talking about it later on with Chloe, like, because my initial thought was like his issue was going to be he can't bring Chloe along like he wanted to, so he wanted some night, their final night together, to be special. But it's also like she's saying goodbye to her life too, and he realizes like also like what I'm asking you to give up. But it's also because he's so unsure of himself, like, how can I fill my father's shoes? Do I deserve my father's legacy? Like, I'm not the right fit. Like, I wanted this. I asked for this. But also, like, now that I'm there, now all I have to do is sit on the throne for the coronation. Like, I don't know if I can do that. And so it's interesting getting into, like, his psyche about, like, his hesitation with the whole becoming God thing. It's because it is the thing of he loves Chloe. He will do anything for Chloe, He'll sacrifice himself for Chloe. But can he say the same thing for humanity? Because for the sake of humanity, to be God means he has to give his everything. It's a 24/7 job. You don't get like your personal days or something like that, which Lucifer is the type of person that's like, I need a break from this whole God thing, I mean, I was about to say, like, you have that comparison to like God from, what makes me think of like God from Preacher a little bit. But the one thing he would never be able to do is give up Chloe, and that's something he might have to do, because it's like, right, my love for you, it's like, where will we stand at the end of all of this? Like, if I take the job of God, like, I don't know what that means for our future. Like, I make it seem like I have it all figured out, but I have no idea, like, what it's going to cost, like, what the price is for being God, and it might be his relationship with Chloe that he might not be able to kind of sustain both. It might be impossible, because it's like, right, Chloe will always come first, but like the entire world, or kind of universe probably, in totality has to be like, has your full undivided attention, so that is kind of something you don't think about when you're like, yeah, God Almighty, it's not that big of a deal. It's like, no. Like, being God and that's why, like, to be fair, that's why the goddess and God didn't work out like well, because she always felt like, oh, I fell to the wayside to other stuff. It's like, that could sadly be their future. It took him retiring for them to get back together, and now they're off in her dimension, that world, that universe she created, and now they're together again. But it's like, it would literally have to be that. Like, Lucifer would have to basically, and also, like, Chloe's human, so she has a limited lifespan, so it's like, would he keep putting it off over and over and over again until she eventually died? But then she'd be in heaven, but then it's still like, yeah, I got to go do the whole God thing. I can't actually be with you here, even if you are in heaven. So it's a complicated thing. And obviously, like the cases normally do, it ties into it. Because obviously, like, Carol's handling things his way, but Chloe's like, oh, he's missing evidence this way. Ella, you should check this person's pockets, because you're looking at the pockets of a normal person, looking at it from the pockets of a normal person rather than looking for stuff that you should be looking for in a magician and stuff like that. So, Carol actually gets frustrated at Chloe, but eventually is like, right, I'm kind of mad that you've been doing a parallel investigation the entire time, but legitimately, I need your help. And so, obviously, it turns out, like, Home Dude is getting framed for Jarrett's murder, and it turns out it's, Mogar's, like, son who was behind all of this, because it's like, right, like, I was gonna, because apparently there was, like, a Netflix series in the works, which I'm like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge to Netflix, because once again, like, last season, they made, like, some crack about, like, Fox, and so it's just interesting. But now it's like the son wanted everything, and like it's like, oh, the deal was almost done, but then Jarrett turned it down and like wouldn't go down with it because he wanted, to keep Mogard's like legacy and stuff like that. So, which in that moment, Lucifer's like, oh, you're calling your dad selfish? He's like, no, you're the selfish one. You don't deserve your dad's legacy. But luckily, like, Lucifer chased after him because it's like, oh, the door's closed, but then, like, he rips through the door. But turns out Chloe's okay the entire time because apparently she had a Menadol's necklace, which I was, like, if you look at that look on her face, she was like, yeah. I'm like, are we going to have, like, a situation where, and this is going to be an example, there was those rings from the Vampire Diaries that Rick and Jeremy wore that basically brought humans back to life. And then they had to stop using those rings because Alaric came back possessed by the soul of well, I can't remember. Was it he was possessed by the soul of a crazy person, or basically he just went crazy, like dying that many times, like it was kind of like the rings had a history of like humans going insane because of it. So part of me was like, that look on Chloe's face, I was like, it looked like she went a little dark side Chloe did. She's like, like almost like, little Gollum-esque, in it, like, ooh, my precious, but it's like, I felt powerful. She says later on, like, she's just not, as a police officer, she's used to walking around with a weapon, so she's not used to kind of feeling like unarmed, so that's why she took it. But I just think that's so interesting that I'm like, I almost feel like that's set up for the future bits of like, yeah, like she might be like a little power obsessed, like she might not want to let that go, because there's just certain things in the trailer makes me think like that might be tied to some of Chloe's behavior as we see that kind of shift over the course of the season. Maybe not, but maybe it's nothing, but it's just like that look of like, ooh, I feel so powerful. It just because I mean, we've seen humans with it, but not extensive amount. I mean, it does. There is a part of you not wanting to give it up, because home dude who had it last season, who ended up dying, and that's how the final piece fell into like Michael's hands and stuff. But that dude seemed like, I'm not willing to give it up. It's like, I think it does shift something in your personality. I mean, that divinity, that celestial power kind of flowing through you, I think it warps your mind a little bit, Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So it's enough for like divinity not to be like it's enough for celestials not to be affected, but humans are on a different level. Like, that's too much power, and it starts. So I think that might be a direction we'll see Chloe's story going, potentially. But interesting turn of events in that regard. The other side of the episode I thought was kind of fascinating is you got Maze, Eve, Amenadiel, and I keep doing that. I always mess up like the end of his name, Amenadiel, and Linda, like sitting out, because it's like, it's Maze's last and Eve's last time on Earth, because they're going to go to hell and she's going to rule as a queen. And I did like that Linda did bring up some questions like, well, what are you going to do? And she's like, I don't know. It's like, like, what do you, and then like you see Amenadiel being like, why are you poking and prodding? Like, get out of their business. But you can just tell over and over when Amenadiel was like, hey, when they start fighting, Amenadiel was like, hey, I'm going to be a cop there. Hey, and he switches the narrative in the conversation, because he's like, hey, I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to make fun of me. And she's like, well, thank you for giving me this, because I will make fun of you for it. Thank you for supplying the ammunition. And Linda's kind of giving him that look like, what are you doing? And she's trying to like take it back to the relationship, because it's like, initially Eve wasn't sure what she was going to do. Because obviously the conversation also comes up with like, oh, you're not going to go anywhere near my trash bag of a family. It's like, oh, you don't want to meet your family? It's like, well, I'm sure like she's just not tight with her other like siblings. It's like, I mean, to be fair, Lucifer has this complicated relationship with his siblings. Like, he probably would have never been okay with you meeting his. And, I'm sure Maze feels exactly the same way. So, but it's also like, she's like, right, I'm gonna like, I'm gonna do this. I'm a party. That's what I did in like heaven. I threw all these amazing parties. So it's like, cool. Everyone's gonna have a fun time, good time. It's like, and Amenadiel being like, yeah, hell, definitely could use more of that. But it's like Linda poking a hole in it, being like, who would you be doing that for? Like, it's like, like the tormented. No, I think it was Maze being like, would you do it for the tormented souls? It's like, yeah. It's like, no, but that's the point of them being tortured. It's like, maybe I'll do it for your siblings. And it's like, yep. Ends up being a whole can of worms. But Eve, it's like, well, what do you want me to do? Like, am I supposed to just like serve you and nothing else? Like, that's lonely. And it's like, like I'm not enough. It's like, that's not what I'm saying. It's like, no, it sounds like you're saying being with me is lonely. Like, how twisted is that? It's like, Maze gets defensive because that's the thing. Maze would never admit it, but she's very sensitive, which is actually a very like sweet and cute and endearing part of her personality. But the fact is that she is the like bloodthirsty demon badass that she is. That along with her like sensitivities of like, what do you mean you don't love me? Like, it could be scary in certain regards, But Linda keeps poking and prodding until, like, eventually Maze admits, like, she doesn't want to go to hell. Because And I think this is the first time she finally admits it, because she never really has ever taught, like, she's always been so focused on hell, but now it's a thing of like her finally realizing, like, right, I like my life here. Like, for so long she always so mad at Lucifer, oh, you never took me back to hell. It's like she never took time to realize, like, right, because I think for her everything on earth was always a distraction, but it's like everything you care about is here on earth. It's Eve, but also your job as a bounty hunter. She's like, yeah, I really like it when they're alive, like the fear in them. And Eve's like, yeah, the fear. I'm like, do you really feel that way? Or is it just because you're like, I'm so in love with you, I'm okay, I'm down with everything. It's like, I never really wanted to go to hell either. It's like, oh, that's amazing. She's like, oh, I love you so much. I'm like, oh, you guys are super adorable. And it's like, she's like, yeah, if I could, I'd marry you tomorrow. And then like, Eve's like, are you for real? And it's like, wait, what? It's like, no, I mean, not tomorrow or something, but it's like, wait, did we just get engaged? I'm like, oh, look at them so happy and everything. Even Linda be like, look what I was able to do, practical on the verge of breaking up and now getting engaged. Argument could be made like, that's not a good thing to go like that from 0 to 60 like that, going like, oh, some issues in our relationship, because that's one of those things of like, we should get married to fix our relationship, we should have a baby to fix our relationship. It's one of those weird things that we're kind of okay with, but I guess it's like, well, they're in the situation they are. She's a demon, she's Eve, so it's kind of like, yeah, because she's actually never been to hell before and everything, so this would have been a new experience for her. So that's what she was, that's what Eve was enjoying. But Amenadiel is kind of like, right, I give it to you, you worked it out. But he actually starts saying like, because she's like, yes, you are a good friend, but also you're a really good therapist. But could this have actually been a little self-serving in your regard? Because she's like, right, you're actually a good therapist too, Amenadiel. She's like, right, like, how do you go from like freaking, I had God on my couch, I told God, like, how do you go from that? Just everything else just seems so antsy of like, oh, so-and-so's cheating again. Who cares? I had God on my chair. I helped save the universe. But Amenadiel is kind of like saying that there are no small acts. He's like, I get that more than anything. Like, going from being like a champion fighter in God's army to, now being a beat cop. He's like, I totally get it. But now his understanding of being around humans so much is that even every small act matters, The little things in life do matter. Like every act, is a part of all of that. So, but I think for Linda, it's, she's like, I don't think I'm to that point yet. I don't know if I'm ready or if I'll ever be, I guess just kind of being okay with the smaller things in life. Cause it's like, right, she's kind of gotten to this like personal, like best in her, like craft in her career. And that for one, she can't tell anyone cause no one's going to believe her. Two, it's like, it's a personal thing, but like, also it's like, once again, you can't do anything with that, so there's also that, like, once again, it's just like, everything else just seems like petty in comparison. So that's kind of an interesting direction to see like Linda's story kind of go with like her dealing with that. But at the end, you have like Lucifer sneaking away from Chloe, and there's a picture of him and Dan from last season, and I'm like, oh no! And then he goes to visit Dan in hell, which Dan's playing like table tennis or whatever with that demon, and it's kind of like, yeah, this guy sucks, and it's like, it's been thousands of years, but it turns out like Lucifer has secretly been going to hell because he doesn't want Chloe to know, because he probably doesn't want to get her hopes up either, but they've been trying different things to get Dan out of hell, but no go. And so Dan's getting to the point that he's losing hope, because he's like, right, every time you come here, you give me hope, but then you disappoint me because like nothing works out, nothing changes. And so that in itself is torture. And he's just kind of like, just go ahead, become God, and then you can like pop me up. But like for Lucifer, it's like, if I go directly against your will, all of free will be out the like thrown out the door, and I can't do that, because out of anyone, the rebellious son that he is, he would never take away free will, especially considering like he had so many family issues because he thought everything was a manipulation from his dad. I mean, also knowing like, right, how much of my free will was my own free will and how much of it was like my brother screwing me over to be like the bad child, the bad seed. So Lucifer, out of anyone, will never break free will, because it's kind of like everyone deserves it. Like I said, the rebel, the desire magnet that he is, he would always, well, mirror would be the more apt description, but it's like, of course, he would drive home more about the whole free will thing. Like, he would push for that more so than anyone else. I'm sure there's a lot of his siblings that are like, no, like, you don't need a free will. Like, I'm sure there's quite a few who'd be all about that. cause less trouble that way, I'm sure. But it's kind of sad because Lucifer does want to help out Dan. He just doesn't know how. And like I said, I don't think he's telling Chloe that this is something he's been working on because he wants to do it for Chloe, for Trisha. Like, I mean, especially because Dan's only dead now because of his brother. So it's kind of like I feel even more indebted to you because at the end of the day, we are friends. And no matter how much I rag on you, I do care about you. So... But obviously nothing changes in hell, and obviously back to playing, and that demon dude being like, nah, it's just my backhand that sucks. But then all of a sudden there's like a thunderstorm, and Dan's like, wait, what was that? It's like, the dude's like, it's not, don't worry about it. Because the biggest thing is like, how did Lee has been the only human to do what no one else is. Like, it's like, because Dan's like, I don't feel any guilt. I was like, I think you do. There's still something there, something deep down that I don't think you've answered, because it's like, oh, I want to use the same door Lee did. It's like, yeah, but the door is actually kind of like a metaphor. It's not like a real legitimate door. But it's like, how did Lee get in heaven when no one else has been able to do that before? It's like, how? Like, maybe like, I guess Lucifer would have to talk to Lee to really find out. I mean, granted, he can't go back to heaven. He'd have to become God to really be okay in heaven and not burn up like he did last time. But it's like, what was different about Lee's circumstances? That what revelation did he have that no human in history has ever had before for someone to go from like hell to go to heaven? He's the first of his kind. So it's like, what did he do differently? What was different? It had to have like be in some part because of Lucifer, but I guess it's also like because it was the metaphorical door that Lee actually went through. So like it does make me feel like Dan thinks like, okay, like, well, he's being not tortured, like he's put in a special spot, like he's getting a room to himself that no other human has ever gotten that privilege before. So he's kind of lucked out in that regard. But I think there's a lot more, there's a deeper guilt that Dan's running from because he thinks he's dealt with all his guilt. It's like, no, like guilt runs too deep for you to just, I think there's always going to be some, like, it's not always going to be present at the surface. I think it's deep. It's very, like, underneath type of stuff. So I think there's still stuff he hasn't dealt with. But we get our little teaser at the end of our new Queen Bee on the throne. I mean, Maze isn't on the throne. Lucifer's not on the throne. So somebody's taking the opportunity to occupy it. So... who that person is, once at the time we recorded this, I have no idea. I'm watching these one episodes at a time, and I did not look into it because I figured because of the blood wings is like, are you a fallen angel? Like, are you someone that kind of went down with Lucifer to hell? Because were you one of the angels on his side, or you something else? Are you like a illegitimate child? Like, I brought up those questions, like, your my thoughts and theories, or like, no, it was like my trailer discussion. I've thrown that out there, so I don't know. I'm excited to see. Once again, like always, I'm going to be trying to drop these all at once. So I'm not going to be releasing these until like I've reviewed all 10 episodes of this final season. So when you do, like, by the time you see this, I will try to put the episodes up 15 minutes from each other. So if this is up, like, maybe pretty quickly, the rest of the episode should be up. Like, I'm not going to give any particular date promise because I'm not sure when it might take me a couple days. It might take me like a whole week. It just depends on like how much I get sidetracked with other stuff. But yeah, I'm very, very excited to see how this final season plays out. I'm curious to see where the next episode takes us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.